Dwight David Eisenhower was born October 14, 1890 in Denison, Texas. Ever since he was a boy, Eisenhower wanted to be in the military. Eisenhower's interest in military history was first spiked by his mother's collection of history books, even though she was strongly against violence. His later decision to attend the military academy, West Point, saddened his mother, who thought that warfare and violence in general was rather wicked. While attending West Point, Eisenhower relished the attention of traditions and sports, but didn't enjoy hazing as much, but accepted it as a plebe or first-year student. While there, Eisenhower regularly violated the more detailed regulations and graduated with a poor disciplinary rating. Eisenhower's first life-threatening situation was as a freshman when an injury to his knee developed a leg infection that grew into his groin area and was diagnosed as life-threatening by his doctor. Dwight refused to have his leg amputated, which his doctor claimed to be the only way to save him, and miraculously, he recovered. Though he had to repeat his freshman year, he graduated in the middle of the class of 1915, out of which 59 members eventually became general officers, giving it the nickname, the class the stars fell on. Dwight Eisenhower was also a great military leader and general throughout the course of the Second World War. His great militaristic movements made him rise through the ranks until he was officially pronounced the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces and General of the American Forces. One of his major achievements was his successful landing in northern Africa. This was in 1942 and allowed for better combat in North Africa, where the Axis powers had recently taken control. Another major accomplishment was the successful invasion of Sicily, Italy. This invasion of Italy, a major Axis power, marked as a major accomplishment not only for Eisenhower, but for all of the Allied forces. Arguably his most famous accomplishment during World War II was the Doomsday Invasion. This invasion, also known as D-Day, caused a huge turnaround in the war and gave the Allied forces momentum which they would use to win the war later. Over 100,000 Allied soldiers marched through the beaches of Normandy after thousands of casualties were suffered. There were 160,000 men of the Allied forces on the ground during Doomsday, along with a great amount of air support and naval support. The Axis army there was expecting an attack, but D-Day's sheer size took them by surprise, and they were crushed under the force of the Allies. This announcement by Eisenhower over the radio announces the Allies' intent to attack Germany at Normandy.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
The date was decided as June 6, 1944, a sunny day with a warm temperature. The operation was called Overlord, and it was successful. Despite extreme amounts of casualties on both sides, the Allied forces were able to penetrate the beaches, giving them a huge European presence. After the success of Operation Overlord, Dwight Eisenhower went on to assist the Soviet Union in capturing Berlin and eventually forced Germany to surrender. In June of 1943, a visiting politician suggested to Eisenhower that he should become President of the United States after the war. Eisenhower believed that a general should not participate in politics, and an author later wrote, "Figuratively speaking, Eisenhower kicked his political-minded visitor out of his office." Others also asked him about his political future, and Eisenhower told one that he could not fathom wanting to have any political office, from dog catcher to Grand High Supreme King of the Universe, and another that he could not serve as Army Chief of Staff if people believed that he had political ambitions. In 1948, Eisenhower became president of Columbia University, an Ivy League university in New York. Eisenhower held his position of president of Columbia until he became president in 1953, despite attempts to resign after becoming the NATO Supreme Commander, which the Board of Trustees declined. In 1952, Eisenhower retired from active service and returned to Abilene to announce his candidacy for Republican Party nomination. On November 4, 1952, after winning the election by a landslide, Eisenhower was elected the United States' 34th president. His domestic policy picked up where Roosevelt's New Deal and Fair Deal programs left off. In 1953, he orchestrated an armistice that brought peace to South Korea's border. Also that year, Eisenhower made his famous Atoms for Peace speech at the United Nations General Assembly. The United States and Russia had both recently developed atomic bombs, and the speech promoted applying atomic energy to peaceful uses rather than using it for weaponry and warfare. In 1955, Eisenhower met with Russian, British, and French leaders at Geneva to further quell the threat of an atomic war. In 1956, Eisenhower was re-elected to a second term, winning by an even wider margin than in his first election, despite the fact that he had recently recovered from a heart attack. Over the course of his second term, Eisenhower continued to promote his Atoms for Peace program. In his second term, he also grappled with crises in Lebanon and the Suez. Accomplishments during his 2 terms include creating the U.S. Information Agency and establishing Alaska and Hawaii as states. Eisenhower also supported the creation of the interstate highway system during his time in office. Another of his distinctions was signing the 1957 Civil Rights Act and setting up a permanent Civil Rights Commission. Eisenhower was additionally responsible for signing the bill to form the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. Poised to leave office in January of 1961, Eisenhower gave a televised farewell address in which he warned the nation against the dangers of the Cold War military-industrial complex.
3 days from now, after half a century in the service of our country, I shall lay down the responsibilities of office as, in traditional and solemn ceremony, the authority of the presidency is vested in my successor. This evening,
Eisenhower died on March 28, 1969, at Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C., following a long period of suffering from a heart-related illness. In addition to a state funeral in the nation's capital, a military funeral was held in Eisenhower's beloved hometown of Abilene, Kansas.
Say you had a wish, but you never even said it out loud.
One of these days the sky's gonna break and everything will escape, and I'll know